There we go. So hopefully that's sharing, and is that right? I take it as it is. Brilliant. Diolch yn fawr. Thanks, Sam. So what we're going to do now then is move on to look at Substrand 2. And Substrand 2 focused on leading and working in clusters. So the Education Endowment Foundation back in 2021, for example, talked about the fact that there are a range of different terms that are commonly used to describe collaborative activity in practice between practitioners in settings, including partnership, networks, clusters and families, and that often these terms might be used interchangeably to describe different ways of education settings working with one another. And they suggest that collaboration between education settings is complex, as some of those points that people have fed back so far illustrates, and may encompass a range of different types of both informal and formal collaborative activity, and involve practitioners in settings of different phases and types. And again, that was very evident in terms of the posts you'd noted in terms of different stakeholders on the Padlet, for example. The 2023 Welsh Government response to the Estyn report, which focused on the progress of schools and local authorities in supporting learners with ALN, noted that the development of cluster working, often led by a cluster ALNco, had been really helpful in terms of ensuring that schools felt well supported in implementing ALN reforms through sharing examples of practice and specialist resources. However, they did identify that the long-term sustainability of such a coordinated approach to cluster working was unclear. Effective clusters are often supported by a number of features that can include strong leadership, well-defined and robust structures and processes, clear communication, and clear sensitivity to different contexts. There are a range of benefits that have been associated with such cluster working practices, which might include improved services, mutual support between organisations, more efficient use of existing resources, sharing examples of best practice, and increasing capacity across settings to replicate success. Despite perceived benefits, there were also a number of challenges that had been raised. In particular, cluster working can be difficult to initially embed and then maintain in practice, and further challenges related to perceived threats to school autonomy, for example, power imbalances between practitioners and settings, the additional workload, which again came through in your Padlet comments associated with supporting collaborative activity, and challenges to establishing shared objectives and common goals. Harris and Spillane suggested that collaboration and networking back in 2008 were already emerging within school models, and that such practices required responsive leadership approaches. In relation to leading and supporting ALN in practice, an ALNco may take the lead, as we've seen in Wales, across a cluster of education settings. Rangan and Hoyle 2020 suggests that in relation to leading and informing a practice across networks or clusters, there are a range of leadership styles and skills that might be supportive of this depending upon the context and the circumstances, but they highlight that leadership must be evident everywhere. And one of these leadership styles, as suggested by Harris and De Flamini 2016, links to distributed leadership. And distributed leadership may be seen as a collaborative and autonomous approach to leading in a complex and changing environment. And rather than relying solely on top-down leadership approaches, such an approach emphasises giving people autonomy to innovate and align towards a common goal. Tidrin et al. 2014, for example, noted that distributed leadership is seen as supporting higher levels of group problem solving, higher rates of effective decision making, and therefore they suggest as a leadership model, it is one that might encourage and support collaboration, including knowledge sharing and supporting consistent interactions. So distributed leadership is intended to support an interactive web of leaders and followers in which roles and responsibilities adjust accordingly to meet challenges which might support cluster working, and as suggested by Spillane from a distributed perspective, leadership is a system of practice comprised of different interacting components, leaders, followers, and situations, and how these interact together must be understood, as Spillane suggested that the system is often more than the sum of its component parts or practices. Distributed leadership may be viewed as mobilising leadership expertise at all levels in a school, for example, in order to generate more opportunities for change and to build the capacity for improvement. And as Spillane suggests, distributed leadership may provide an opportunity for individuals to exercise leadership within organisations as well as across organisations. Thinking back to some of the assignments from our previous module, the Leadership and Management of ALN module, for example, a common theme that emerged across many of those assignments linked to the fact that there were people within your settings who had an informal leadership role, for example, or might have been a leader in terms of knowledge or expertise, despite not having that formal leadership title. So shortly, we're going to move into our second breakout room. We're going to give you slightly less than 10 minutes this time, but we're going to ask you to think a little bit about distributed leadership. So again, we're asking you to identify a scribe, to jot down some of your thoughts. We will come to group 3 first next time in terms of sharing some verbal feedback as well. And in particular for this discussion over the next 8 minutes or so, what we'd like you to think about are these 2 points on the screen. So are there particular key situations in which distributed leadership could support the role of the ALNCO? And who might the leaders and followers be in such situations? So are you able to think about examples within your practice where distributed leadership has happened, for example? And we'd also like you to think a little bit more generally in terms of distributed leadership as an approach and how this might support the role of the ALNCO within settings and across clusters. So I'll just leave that slide up on screen for another 10 seconds.